Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie and this is my co-PI Jojo, and today we're going to be presenting on the impacts of COVID-19 on Asian and Asian Americans. I just wanted to start by saying that this was a really important study for us, or something that we just wanted to look into, given the the racism that the Asian American community has been experiencing since the start of this pandemic, but especially now that we've been seeing this huge spike in anti-Asian hate crimes, where actually the Stop AAPI hate group has shown that there has been a 1,900% increase actually in these hate crimes against Asian Americans. So that's why we thought that it was so important for us to be able to talk with you guys today about how the community has been impacted by the pandemic.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. So as Stephanie mentioned, that is, I think, one of the main reasons that we are really interested in this topic. And, as she mentioned, the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic definitely created a lot of fear in the public, leading to hate crime, increasing hate crime, stigma, xenophobia, and ethnic racial discrimination targeted at Asians globally, as well as in the United States. So there has been studies showing that these experiences with racial discrimination and xenophobia caused by COVID-19 are associated with higher levels of depression and anxiety among Asians and Asian Americans in the United States. And that's not to say these experiences, racial discrimination, hate crimes never existed before COVID. They are, like Stephanie said earlier, they have been found to be exacerbated and increased in the number of these events. And these increased events definitely led to exacerbated or poor mental health among this population. However, only a few studies on Asians and Asian Americans in the United States examined experiences with thriving in the face of ethnic and racial discrimination, and the relationship between resilience and thriving and psychological distress in the context of discrimination. So our study utilized a stress diathesis model, which argues that mental health issues occur when, due to the interaction of stressful situations from one's environmental and predispositional vulnerability. So in our case, the environmental stressors are the experiences with ethnic and racial discrimination that have been happening in our society, target at Asians and Asian Americans in the United States. This model further argues that coping is a way that individuals use to deal with these stressors, deal with these interactions between their predispositional factors and these environmental factors like the ethnic racial discrimination. And we also utilized a thriving model, which argues that individuals can respond to stressors or challenges in 4 ways, which are succumb and survive, or recover, or resilience, or thrive. So we are wondering, for our study, whether Asians and Asian Americans population in the United States are, dealing with the stressors through resilience, and whether that helps them to, deal with the psychological take them to deal with the psychological distress or thriving as the 2 outcomes that in our studies. So we have 4 study objectives, which the first one is we are interested in investigating the COVID-19 triggered ethnic and racial discrimination and vigilance among Asian and Asian Americans in the United States. Secondly, we are interested in investigating the effects of COVID-19 related ethnic, racial, and discrimination and vigilance on the two outcomes that we have, which are thriving and psychological distress. Thirdly, we are interested in looking at the effects of resilience on thriving and psychological distress in our study. Lastly, we are interested in examining resilience as a moderator on the relationship between the stressors that we have, which are the ethnic racial discrimination, level of stress and vigilance, and the outcomes, which are thriving and psychological distress. Yeah.
All right, so this study used a cross-sectional research design. For recruitment, we reached out to potential participants through mostly email, social media, and snowball sampling, really tailoring to certain organizations and emailing through their listservs. So like the Asian American Psychological Association and APA's Division 17 and 45. Those are just some examples. And we asked that people completed our survey through Qualtrics. Any of the data that we're presenting today is preliminary and based on a sample of 112 Asian and Asian Americans living in the US. So for the mean age, our participants the mean age was 36.63. In terms of gender, the majority of our participants were female, and also in terms of ethnicity, the majority were mainly identified as Chinese, but we also had participants from other East Asian country who identified as East Asian, Southeast Asian, and also of mixed races as well. And you can see the measures that we used here for the different predictors and outcomes that Jojo has already mentioned. So for our data analysis, we use we analyzed the descriptive statistics and the bivariate correlational matrix. We're first examined to look at the different relationships between our different stressors and outcomes. We then used a 4-step hierarchical multiple regression to analyze the impact of different stressors and resilience on psychological distress. So for that first step, we input different demographics, which included age, gender, and education as our covariates. Then we had discrimination, vigilance, and stress for the second step. Resilience was entered next. And then any interactions between significant stressors and resilience were entered as that last step. And then we also ran a 3-step hierarchical multiple regression, now looking at the impact of stress and resilience on our other outcome measure, which was thriving. So very similar, we used the demographics first for step 1, then discrimination, vigilance, and stress for step 2, and then resilience for step 3. In terms of our correlations, we found that the level of stress was correlated with all other stressors, resilience, and our 2 outcomes, thriving and psychological distress. Race-related stress, which we specifically are referring to COVID-19 ethnic and racial COVID-19 related ethnic and racial discrimination and vigilance. They were positively and moderately correlated with psychological distress. Resilience was negatively and moderately correlated with psychological distress, and thriving was only correlated with level of stress, which was a negative and small relationship. So looking at our first regression, which was examining the relationship between stressors, resilience, and psychological distress. So that is this one here. Almost all the models accounted for significant change in variance. The model where we added resilience was very close to significant and actually found that discrimination was a significant predictor, and resilience again was very close to significant, where the p-value was 0.051. So that was in model 3. But in this last model, which again, like I said, is right here, we see that the interaction between stress and discrimination and resilience accounted for 8.9% of the variance in psychological distress scores. So that means that the demographics, demographic stressors, resilience, and the interaction between the stressors and resilience accounted for a total of 65% of the variance in psychological distress scores. And in this last model, the only interaction that reached significance was discrimination and resilience. And then looking at our second multiple regression, which is here, looking at stress and resilience in predicting thriving, model 2, we found accounted for an additional 14.6% of the variance in thriving, where discrimination and the level of stress were significant predictors, but that addition of resilience in model 3 did not lead to a significant change in variance. But that said, we see that discrimination and level of stress were significant predictors. So that's also why we didn't run that fourth step, because the interaction, or well, resilience was not found to be a significant predictor in that in this model.
Okay. So based on our preliminary data, we found that higher levels of distress predicted greater psychological distress. And this result is pretty consistent with the current literature. And the higher level of stress, they are not only limited to ethnic or racial discrimination. They can just be a very general level of stress perceived by the participants. So yeah, that's very consistent with the current literature on, other findings, which found that level of stress, including ethnic racial discrimination, tended to predict higher levels of distress, whether that means, higher levels of depression, anxiety, or just lower well-being in general. We then found a partially supported moderation model with an interaction between the COVID-19 related ethnic racial discrimination and resilience on psychological distress. So what this means is that what Stephanie was pointing out earlier, we did find that the COVID-19 related ethnic racial discrimination to be significant in the model 3 for the outcome of psychological distress. However, the significance level for resilience was so close to 0.05. So that was not fully significant for resilience. However, we still decided to run an interaction for the model 4 just to see the interaction effect between these two factors and see that impact of this interaction on the outcome. So we did find a significant interaction between these two factors, and that means the combination of these two factors has a negative relationship with the psychological distress. So the resilience is only activated when there's a presence of the stressors, which is the ethnic racial discrimination. And then individuals utilize the resilience or the ability to cope or the resiliency factors to deal with the stressors and leading them to experience lower levels of depression and anxiety. So hopefully we are still trying to continue to collect data to get to a greater sample size so that we can see a more certain effect in this relationship. And I think this is also important for this population to, for us as researchers and also for Asian American and Asians community in the United States to really know about, learn, and what are some of the ways to deal with the stressors that they're currently facing during this pandemic because of the rate increase, not just because, like stress related to COVID, but also like stress related to the ethnic racial discrimination caused by the COVID pandemic. So yeah, we're hoping that we can continue to collect data and more people are able to fill out our survey to give us more information to say, well, okay, resilience is a way that individuals or Asian Americans can use to deal with these stressors effectively. Okay, then we also found that participants with higher levels of COVID-19 related discrimination experience higher levels of thriving. This result is very interesting and it's not consistent with what we are hypothesizing at the beginning. So we were thinking that participants with higher levels of COVID related discrimination would experience lower levels of thriving as an outcome. However, we found the opposite. There's one study, done by Torres et al. In 2019. They also found similar results, and they included the level of U.S. identity as a moderator. What they found was that when individuals reported higher levels of U.S. identity, they reported lower levels of thriving when there is high level of ethnic racial discrimination. However, for participants who reported lower levels of U.S. identity, they experience higher levels of thriving in the face of, ethnic and racial discrimination situations. So that might explain why, we also found similar results. Participants, so the ethnic racial identity or the U.S. identity, these factors may act as a better moderator compared to resilience. So for future studies, we are curious. I think it will be definitely helpful to include some of these factors in the study to help explain the relationship between discrimination and thriving, to see where some other factors might influence this relationship. So based on the Torres et al. 2019 study, they were saying that, maybe for individuals who have lower U.S. identity and higher ethnic identity, these factors might function as protective factors that allow participants to kind of pull themselves apart from the greater U.S. identity and to seek support from their own communities and deal with these stressors more effectively compared to individuals who are who have very high level of U.S. identity, and which would be harder for them to explain these ethnic racial discrimination that they're experiencing. So for future directions, yes, we are definitely looking for, looking to continue to get a greater sample size by continue collecting data to, to be more sure of some of the results that we are finding right now. And also we'll continue, I think we can encourage other researchers to continue investigate other factors that are contributing to the relationship between discrimination and thriving. So from our study, we are really hoping to, raise this awareness of COVID-related ethnic racial discrimination experienced by Asians and Asian Americans in the United States, to also, raise that, help individuals be aware that, they are happening and these experiences are getting worse. during this pandemic and the negative psychological impact they have on these populations. More importantly, we are also trying to, through our study, to study what are some of the ways that we can, or individuals can help, utilize on themselves to deal with the stressors that they're experiencing right now. Yeah. Anything else you would like to add, Stephanie?
I think you covered everything. Thanks, Jojo.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So that's all we have, right? Okay.
Yep, thanks, guys.